Welcome back, everybody. This is Quiet Darkness 27 with my latest, my very first, actually, exotic weapon review in Destiny. So let's dive right in. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Dragon's Breath rocket launcher. One of the things I want to do is I want to walk through some of the strengths, some of the drawbacks. I want to give you my opinion as to where it sits within the mass of rocket launchers, and I also would like to answer the age-old question of should I get it or not? So without further ado, let's dive right into some of the details. In the first skill tree here, you'll see you have Smart Drift Control, you have Linear Compensation, and you have Confined Launch. You'll note that I go with Linear Compensation because I like the increase in velocity and I like the increase in blast radius. The more predictable recoil and more recoil seems kind of like an oxymoron there. Those two things don't go together. I don't know how having more recoil should be more predictable recoil, but um, yeah, we'll move on. So the next one is tripod. The next modifier is tripod. This launcher can hold 3 shells in the tube. So you'll notice that the magazine starts off with 2. As soon as you unlock this, you'll be able to carry 3 shells in your tube. And that's awesome for raw damage. The Dragon's Breath has a higher rate of fire than some of the other rocket launchers that you might use, and so that bodes very well for getting those 3 rockets out. Again, it has potential for, good raw damage numbers. The next skill tree is Quick Draw. This weapon can be drawn unbelievably fast. So, in situations where, you're using your primary weapon, you'll be able to switch to your rocket launcher just a little bit more faster. The next one is Javelin, and then the last one is Heavy Payload. Now you'll note that I went with Javelin here because I think that the increase in velocity definitely helps the raw damage numbers of this weapon. I think that the fire rate being a little bit faster and having the 3 tubes, I just think that having the warheads get to their target quickly is more beneficial than having that increased, blast radius. Even though the blast radius on the Dragon's Breath is already huge, I thought that I would go, I would recommend, a higher velocity rate. And part of that is because if you don't have this, you'll notice that the velocity on Dragon's Breath is very noticeably slow. And so if you're one of those people that is really good at leading targets based on the speed, um, then that's all well and good. But for my money, Javelin is where it's at because the rocket is going to get there a little bit faster and it's going to be where I want it to be when I want it to be there for the most part. It's still, even with Javelin, it's still a lot slower than most of the other rocket launchers out there, but the large blast radius does make up for this in some ways. Okay, so the next modifier is Pyromancer. Leaves a solar flare upon detonation. Some damage capabilities here. I do want to let people know that this is not a consistent means of damage. What do I mean by that? I mean that Pyromancer is largely a situational modifier, and by that I mean that I think the Dragon's Breath is really good against large enemies like your ogres or your bosses because they don't move quite as fast. Well, I mean, I guess some of the bosses don't move quite as fast. That Archon Priest teleports, and that's not cool. But for the large part, if you're trying to use this against smaller enemies that are a little bit more agile, you're not going to be doing a ton of damage with the solar flare. For example, if you're firing into a group of Thrall, yes, you're going to destroy that initial group of Thrall, but if there are any that were not destroyed, they're not simply going to just run into your solar flare. And so it's not a consistent form of damage for smaller enemies. For larger enemies, it can be, but don't count on it. The one thing I will say about this, though, is that it can be a very strategic modifier in that it will allow you to control pathing of enemies. So for example, if there are a ton of thrall that are pouring out of a particular doorway, you can, either stop that outpouring a little bit by obviously destroying the initial group, but then causing the secondary group to stop, which will allow your team to be ready. Or if you're just simply wanting to block off a particular path, that is also incredibly helpful for your team and or for you. So it does have some strategic uses, but should not be counted on as an overall, it shouldn't be counted as part of the raw damage equation with respect to, the tripod and everything else. So some of the drawbacks. Naturally, you heard me talk about the velocity. It's kind of slow. The stability of the weapon isn't great, but it's a rocket launcher, so I don't expect to be able to fire all 3 rockets and without having to compensate somewhere along the line. As a matter of fact, with the blast radius of this thing, I probably am not going to be firing all 3 rockets in the same spot unless, again, I'm firing at a large enemy. The reload speed, again, it's a rocket launcher. You have 3 in the tripod. It's, kind of negligible with respect to the reload speed unless you're in the heat of battle and you're firing off your rockets, without really planning where you're putting them. Then I could see that being a drawback. But overall, I think the biggest drawback of the Dragon's Breath is definitely the velocity, which is why, I tried to compensate for that as much as possible, because I really like it when my rockets get to where they're going. Now, how does this differ from other rocket launchers? Where does it sit? First and foremost, I'll say that if you are a seasoned veteran when it comes to rocket launchers, this is it's a good rocket launcher, no question about it. Does lots of damage, has a huge blast radius, great for taking out, small groups of enemies, especially if you're, good at aiming it. You're aiming it on the ground in front of the enemies or on the wall behind the enemies. You're going to do your damage. If you're a person who likes tracking rounds, you're going to have to look somewhere else. The Dragon's Breath is not a sniping rocket launcher, and the iron sights on it should tell you that initially when you first pick it up and when you first look at it. This is not a rocket launcher where you want to be firing at wizards in midair. It's not a rocket launcher that you want to try to be aiming at captains. You definitely want to hit the ground. You want to hit the wall behind enemies, because that's where you're going to get most of your damage, from your blast radius. Again, another drawback is the fact that you cannot count on Pyromancer as a as a form of damage in your DPS equation. You just can't. Again, unless you're calculating it against larger enemies, it's not going to do the kind of damage that a Wolfpack rounds would do. The Wolfpack rounds, it's an increase in your DPS for the Gjallarhorn, because they're going to seek out those enemies. They're going to hit those enemies. So, doing the side-by-side comparison here, you have the fire rate and the blast radius on the Gjallarhorn, which are a little bit lower, but everything else, which is higher. And for my money, for DPS, the Gjallarhorn is still the better rocket launcher. I think that the Wolfpack rounds definitely make up for the lack of blast radius that exists with it, and I think that the fire rate, being a little bit lower, is acceptable because it's tracking the targets anyways. You're going to hit a target. You're going to hit your targets. So you don't have to worry about having a huge blast radius or having a higher fire rate at that point. So the velocity and the stability and the reload speed all being higher are very nice. So where does the Dragon's Breath rank for me? Honestly, I'd have to say it probably ranks under both the Gjallarhorn and Crota's Hunger, mainly because of the tracking mechanisms that both of those rocket launchers have. You're just assured that the damage you're going to be doing is going to reach the target. You don't ever have to wonder if you're going to do the damage. You're going to do the damage. Whereas with the Dragon Breath, you have to know what you're shooting at, and you also have to know where you're putting your rocket in order to do the most damage. You have to know those things. So, and just a quick comparison with the Hunger of Crota, again, lower blast radius, rate of fire, everything else is up there. Again, the shells are going to attract from their weapons, and you're going to have the cluster bombs. So, you know, it's going to be a little bit better, I believe. So, the age-old question of should I get it? If you're an exotic connoisseur like myself, the answer is yes, absolutely. This is still a fun rocket launcher to use. It still has some very cool mechanics on it. Whether it's on your back, the exhaust will smoke. After you fire it, the exhaust ports will turn red. You will be able to see those things. Overall, it just has a very cool look to it. It is still fun to play. It's a different play style than the Gjallarhorn and then Hunger's Crota. So it offers a different kind of experience. So I would recommend buying it. However, if you're happy with your Gjallarhorn, if you're happy with your Hunger of Crota, then you know you need to save your strange coins or whatever. Then by all means, do so. But if you have nothing, you know, left to spend your strange coins on, and it is available for purchase, like it was a couple of weeks ago, then feel free to pick it up. Stick some levels into it, stick some resources into it, use it, have fun with it. It's still a fun rocket launcher. So, with that, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like, a comment, subscribe for any future content. I really want to do a lot more exotic weapons. I want to do some exotic weapon pairings with respect to equipment and different loadouts. I want to let people kind of know what I think is overall the strategic ways of building weapons and things like that. So if you need a little bit of help with that stuff, that's what I'm going to be looking to provide to you. So until my next video, party people, stay safe. This is Quiet Darkness 27, and I am out. Peace.